Museums Victoria respectfully acknowledges the traditional owners of the lands where we work, the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and First Peoples language groups and communities across Victoria and Australia. We pay our respects to their elders past, present, and their emerging leaders. Our organisation, in partnership with the First Peoples of Victoria, is working to place First Peoples living cultures and histories at the core of our practice.
Good evening. Hello, how are we tonight? Oh, what a good-looking crowd you are too. And vocal as well, which is excellent because we're recording this for the ABC, for Big Ideas, the program I host. My name's Natasha Mitchell. You can find Big Ideas every night on Radio National or on the ABC Listen app. And we have a very loving and happy partnership with the Melbourne Museum and Museums Victoria. We also have an online audience joining us tonight, so let's just wave over there. Hello! Lovely to have you with us too. Welcome to Megalodon and the Age of Ocean Giants. Ocean Giants. I'm very excited about tonight's event at the Melbourne Museum. This is the last of this year's museum lecture series. And we are gathering in a place that has hosted over 60,000 years of conversations like this one, and led by the traditional owners, the Wurundjeri peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation, who have always connected their human story to the story of the land, to the seas and to the sky. And that's very much what we're going to do tonight, I think, with these wonderful guests. We are diving deep into ancient oceans. We are diving deep into the story of what Tim Flannery describes as the largest and most mysterious predator that ever lived. It's the subject of his new book that he's written with his daughter, Emma Flannery, called Big Meg, and you can find that outside along with Erich Fitzgerald's new book on pterodactyls, yes?
Triceratops.
Triceratops, yes, that's right. Get it right. Get the dino right.
It's the right era.
Yeah, right era at least. And the fossil lovers are in the house because, of course, we are hosting this event in partnership with the 18th Conference on Australasian Vertebrate Evolution's Palaeontology and Systematics, CAVEPS. Who's part of the CAVEPS crew? Woohoo! Fossil lovers represent. Thank you so much for being here. Your posters look fantastic, I thought. But we want to keep tonight's conversation accessible to a wide public audience because who is not a paleontologist? Welcome, excellent. Lay citizens, represent. Great to have you here. Now, we want your questions tonight as well, and I will come to them somewhere in the middle of the night. And you just need to use Slido for that. So you go on your phone, Slido, just put your phone on silent, by the way, just a reminder, slido.com, and then you use that code. Now, you don't use the hash, do you? There's a hash already there. So Megalodon 2811, slido.com. Just don't be shy. Make sure you ask some questions. We'd love to hear from you and I'll try and integrate them into the conversation. Three passionate scientists with us tonight. We have Professor Tim Flannery. Hi, Tim.
Hello, Natasha.
New book, Big Meg, one of many books that he's written, written with his daughter Emma. Tim, of course, is a paleontologist, an explorer, a conservationist, an author, a scientific leader, an internationally acclaimed advocate around climate change action. We have Dr. Erich Fitzgerald, paleontologist.
Good evening.
Good evening. Naturalist, senior curator in vertebrate paleontology with this wonderful institution, Museums Victoria. And Erich is all about marine mammals and other critters that live in the oceans.
Alive, dead or very dead.
Or very dead, as the case may be. And he leads scientific exploration of fossils in Melbourne's beautiful Bayside. Beaumaris, Black Rock, that incredible site, Victoria's Surf Coast. Perhaps you've been to those sites. They are rich with history. And we might hear a bit about that tonight. And of course, he's written a book on Triceratops. We have from Taiwan, it's so wonderful to have you here, Professor Cheng-Hsiu, say that again, Cheng-Hsiu Tsai.
Greetings.
Sorry.
Thanks.
Sorry, Tsai. Very embarrassing Anglo. He speaks 4 languages and I speak 1. How shameful is that? Wonderful to have you here in Australia, Tsai. Joining us from Taiwan and really blazing a trail in paleontology in Taiwan and focusing on fossils in Taiwan as well, which not many people have done. Conservationist paleobiologist from National Taiwan University and with Japan's National Museum of Nature and Science, focused on uncovering the world's ancient ocean giants like whales and other animals and also their lives around islands. Please give them all a big warm welcome.
Thank you very much.
All right, let's just get it. Let's lay the land of how fossils came to be part of your obsession. And so I want you to take us back just briefly to your childhood. Erich, is it true? Did you bury your toys and excavate them?
I did, and sometimes I even found them. Very true. Loved doing it. Family holidays to the beach, the backyard, whether it was a mastodon, a mammoth, or a T-Rex, it got buried, dug up, and I guess I dreamed of them being in my own museum in my mind, which, well, here we are.
And I just love that the fact that some of those animals, those toy animals that you bought, came from the museum shop.
They did.
The predecessor of this institution.
They did, and it was a tradition that there would be a new dinosaur toy or other crazy Cretaceous critter acquired at the shop on visits and added to the museum collection at home.
And so now you're head of vertebrate paleontology at the museum. Kids, go buy some dinosaurs and you never know what will happen in your life.
It happens. Dreams come true.
Tsai, tell me about the exploding whale. It was being transported in Taiwan and things got very, very ugly. And when you were a teenager, that exploding whale was key to your story, wasn't it?
Exactly. That sperm whale was exploded on the street, and I was dissecting, and I was riding that whale to dissect that sperm whale, about 17 meters long. Fantastic.
Why did it explode?
You could imagine, because in Taiwan, it's basically tropical weather, so it was pretty hot. And then the fermentation was happening in the belly, and it bonked. Fantastic.
You loved it, didn't you?
And then I was a whale rider, and that's the reason I moved to New Zealand to do my PhD. Because have you seen the Whale Rider, the movie, right?
It's a gorgeous film. But what was it about whales that drew you in as a kid?
When I was a kid, because the National Museum of Natural Science in Taiwan is also in my hometown, so actually I was also sure influenced by the dinosaurs. But in Taiwan for a long time, people thought we could not do paleo, or it's impossible to do this kind of paleo stuff in Taiwan. And then until I was the undergraduate and I was dissecting the whales, I realized how they could be so big. And then the only way to understand how they could evolve to such giants is to study fossils.
Yes, study the fossils of giants. That's what we're going to go do today. Tim Flannery, age 16, tell me about the tooth that changed your life.
Well, my goodness, I was always interested in fossils. You know, I remember being an 8-year-old kid, finding a little fossil sea urchin and coming into the Museum of Victoria, which was then in Russell Street, you know, and a kindly fellow took me aside. He had a white coat on, so I believed he knew something. He said, that's a special kind of sea urchin, and fossil sea urchin, 10 million years old, and that was it for me. And I was looking for fossils, like, from then on. And when I was about 16, I managed to get out to Western Victoria. I can't remember how. I was with a couple of friends and my cousin, John Long, and we went down to a famous fossil locality south of Hamilton, and I remember looking into a creek, and there was this great triangular thing in the water. And I picked it up. I kind of knew what it was because I'd read all the books, you know.
Yeah.
And it was this megalodon tooth. And I just felt like the luckiest person that ever lived, you know, to have found this thing. So, you know, what happened after that was kind of, I was obsessed, right, with megalodons. came to the end of year 12 at school, and Dr. Tom Rich, who I think might be in the audience here somewhere, if he is, raise a hand.
Oh, Tom Rich is in the audience.
I wouldn't be here as a paleontologist today without Tom, who was curator here for many, many years. He found somehow $500 for me to search the Beaumaris fossil site, which was a couple of miles from where I lived, you know, in the bay, to look for a fossil seal that I'd found part of. So I remember diving into the water there on the first day. I had $500 to do what I would have done anyway for nothing. Dived into the water, and there was this huge megalodon tooth just sitting there in the sand. First day on the job, right? And I thought, and the only condition for this job was that I hand over every fossil I'd found to the museum. So I spent a kind of restless night thinking about this, and then realised I actually had to hand it in. I took it in, handed it to Tom, and he said, "Oh, that's great, but where are the fossil seals?"
I love it.
Anyway, I remember, I came back years later, met Erich, and I said, "Erich, after 40 years, I'd love to see the megalodon tooth that I found and gave to the museum." So Erich said, "Oh, yeah, sure." And we start looking through the drawers, and we can't find it, right? And then Erich's got dark thoughts about things being stolen from the museum, as they are occasionally, and so forth. But anyway, so I go home a bit dismayed, and then I get a phone call from Erich about a week later saying, "I found it. It had just been misfiled in the wrong drawer." Oh. You know, so I come in and hold this thing in my hand that I hadn't seen for 40 years, this kind of treasure. You know, it was amazing. It was
so describe it for us.
It was green, enamel was green, a bit like that one there you can see.
We've got one on the screen here, but the size of a hand, pointed like an arrow's head.
This amazing fossil. And anyway, Tom was in his office there, and I walked past and said, "Do you remember this, Tom? I found this megalodon tooth." He said, "Oh, you should have just told me you wanted it. I wasn't interested in it at all."
You've been hankering it after it all these years. But what was it?
Then I realised that it was better off in the museum. It's part of the state's heritage. It belongs here. It'll inform people from now on into perpetuity. So I was very glad that it ended up in the museum.
But what compelled you to tell the story of the megalodon, the enormous shark with these giant teeth in this book, Big Meg?
Well, I think, you know, I was 16 years old when I found that first tooth. You're kind of impressionable, you're looking for something in your life. And I just remember this feeling of enormous good fortune. And, you know, for years afterwards, I'd dream about finding megalodon teeth and wake up feeling so happy, you know, that I'd found this thing. And I became a mammalogist, a paleontologist, but studying mammals, you know. But the megalodon's still been a big part of my life just because of those early experiences. Yeah. So my daughter is, she's 8 months pregnant as we speak. She's going to make me a grandfather soon. She's a great science writer. And so I suggested to her, you know, about a year ago or so that we write this book.
Let's tell that story.
Yeah, let's tell the story. So we did, and the book's now out, and it's there for the world to see.
Erich Fitzgerald, describe for me Megalodon. Introduce us to this ancient, long-gone shark. You think it's a weirdo in the history of the oceans, but just introduce us to it first. How big is this creature? Help us imagine it into being.
Okay, Natasha, so you've got to picture a shark that might have looked a bit like the white shark, the great white shark, might have looked a bit like it, we're not entirely sure. It had a huge mouth, teeth the size of an adult's outstretched palm of their hand. Its length is probably something like that of a city bus, perhaps that large. So we're talking a big predatory shark, but the size of some of the larger whales. Not blue whale sized, so not the size of a Boeing 737 jet, but pretty big by anyone's standards. And I think...
And just to get a sense of its mouth,
yep,
about 3 metres in diameter.
Up to that. So everyone probably in this theatre and tuning in at home could stand in its open jaws.
And that'd be fun.
It'd be an experience. It might be your last experience.
Exactly.
With a living Meg. But yeah, it would have been an awe-inspiring animal. And yes, I'm going to go out on a limb and say it is a weirdo in terms of the history of life in the oceans.
Why is it a weirdo?
I'm going to say it's a weirdo because for most of the last 250 million years, that includes all of the dinosaur age, the Mesozoic era, and most of the last 66 million years, the Cenozoic era, that's the period of time that we live in now on a grand scale, it was not big fish, and that's what Megalodon was, of course, not big fish that were large apex top predators in the oceans. It was actually the ancestors of animals that once lived on land and said, we've had enough of this, we're going back into the sea, and we're going to make a living in the ocean, and that living is good because of food.
Yeah.
And so Megalodon is one of the few let's say, originally land animals, a fish that actually grew to colossal sizes and for a brief window was the top predator in our oceans.
How brief is brief?
We're talking, let's say, only a few million years, really. We're talking maybe 10 to 13 million years. Not long.
That's brief.
That's brief. I know.
That's not
I know. just a blink of the eyelid in historical time.
Not long at all.
But I'll come to you, Tsai, because you're focused on whales.
Yes.
But I want to just come back to Tim. How did it come to be then that the world's largest predator, and that's the claim you're making, might be contested, we might get to that, came to exist in the sea and not on the land?
Well, the sea covers 70% of the surface of the Earth. It's by far the largest part of what we call the biosphere because there's vertical depth to it, much more than on land, and it's very productive. So, there is a lot of food in the sea. But the current oceans, when you look at them, the largest predator is arguably, the orca, the killer whale, that weighs 6 or 7 tonnes. This thing might have weighed 60 tonnes. So we're looking at a really different ocean, and I'm still perplexed. It's one of the mysteries, really, that I think, how did we ever have an ocean productive enough to support a population of such enormous predators?
So let's just get a picture of how we piece together the story, the evolutionary story of these giants of the ocean. So what can you tell from a tooth? Because in fact, not much, there's been plenty of teeth found, there's been a few vertebrae found, but of course sharks are full of cartilage, which isn't preserved in the fossil record. So what is the story that you can reveal from a tooth?
Well, that's why I called us the most mysterious predator that ever lived. And when we know far more about Tyrannosaurus that became extinct 66 million years ago than we do about the Megalodon shark, because we've got whole skeletons of Tyrannosaurus. We've got teeth, plenty of teeth, and a few vertebrae. For the Megalodon, we don't know the shape of the body, really. People can infer different things, but it's not the same as having the proof. We haven't even got a set of jaws of Megalodon with all of the teeth in their life positions.
Mm-hmm. Just a whole lot of single teeth, because of course sharks shed teeth.
That's right.
All the time.
Exactly, but there's been some really interesting what are called isotopic studies done of the teeth that suggest that Megalodon was a hypercarnivore. So it's a carnivore that is eating other carnivores. So when you think about what that might be, and it clearly ate some whales as well, but perhaps, if these studies are correct, it was eating other sharks, And when you think about the implications of that, it's staggering because, the food pyramid is such that if you want to add an extra level to the height of the food pyramid, you've got to extend the base enormously, And you think about how many millions of kind of smaller fish must have there been in the oceans to feed the Megalodon, to feed the sharks that the Megalodon ate. So it's an unbelievably productive ocean. I think it's something we cannot imagine today, what those Miocene oceans were like. And as Erich will tell you, Megalodon perhaps wasn't alone as a hyperpredator.
You think there were more out there? Another biggie.
For that strange quirk in the history of our Earth, that strange quirk in time, maybe. But it was a whale.
Dun, 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 dun. The plot thickens.
A whale. So in particular...
A big one.
A big one. So, in fact, possibly an extinct species of giant-toothed, gigantic, so-called killer sperm whale with the name, fantastic name, Leviathan melvillei, the leviathan. Named after...
I heard the audience.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. So Leviathan melvillei matched Megalodon, probably in size, but possibly had an even more ferocious bite, and we think perhaps was feeding on other marine mammals, and in particular some of the tiddlers of the baleen whale family. So just little ones, only about, you know, the size of a Toyota Land Cruiser.
What are you saying about baleen whales? Because, Tsai, you are truly obsessed with the baleen whale. These are your friends. You spend your life studying baleen whales, don't you? And it's not so much the teeth, because of course they're toothless. They're filter feeders. They don't use teeth to chomp in.
But actually, if we're looking at the fossils, they were having teeth.
They had teeth once. Yeah, so that interests me. You're interested in, but you're also looking at the ear bones of baleen whales, aren't you?
Yes.
Both present and extinct. What can ear bones tell you in the way that teeth are telling a story?
So essentially, so it's about a hearing a frequency. So essentially, when you are hearing, for example, like the birds, the whales, when you are hearing the hearing frequency, when we could hear will be quite different. So if we are looking at those ear bones, well, essentially we can see the structure based on the ear bones, and then we could tell what kind of frequency they could hear.
So tell us about what ear bones have told you about where sharks were where whales were throughout the world. Because this is interesting to me. You actually use these, you compare extinct whale ear bones to current living whale ear bones to help tell a story of geography, don't you?
So essentially, the idea is very simple, because we are working on fossils. They need to be there to be found, and otherwise we don't have the evidence. Like the Megalodon, so generally speaking, we don't have the body of the Megalodon, but we have a lot of teeth. Like the ear bones of a whale, because it's very dense. It's very dense, so it's easy to be preserved and easy to be fossilized.
Yeah.
So we could find this kind of ear bones across the world.
How do we know that Megalodon, this giant predator, this giant shark, now extinct, fed on baleen whales?
I don't believe this hypothesis. Sure, some people are hypothesizing this kind of possibility, but essentially, we don't have very good evidence, because essentially, at the moment, we don't have that kind of bite marks on those baleen whales.
Because what you're looking for are Megalodon teeth marks inside the bones, fossilised bones of baleen whales, yeah?
Yeah, but for that kind of killer sperm whale, essentially, we haven't got the bite mark of the killer sperm whale on baleen whale fossils. We haven't got that.
Oh, fascinating. Why would it be that baleen whales would start with teeth and then throughout time evolve to no longer have teeth?
So that's the key to working on those fossils in the southern hemispheres, because essentially, based on the fossils in the southern hemisphere, we could see the transitions kind of from toothed to toothless baleen whales.
Why?
That's a big question.
Aren't teeth useful? Why would filter feeding take priority over teeth?
So essentially, back to more than 30 million years ago, when Australia and Zealandia, they were separating from Antarctic. And then you could think of this, the ocean current was changing. And then when the ocean current was changing, it brought up a lot of the kind of nutrition from the sea bottom. And then that's a time which could afford a lot of phytoplankton and zooplankton, and that would be a good timing for filter feeding.
Interesting. Do you have anything to add there? Why would a whale lose its teeth over time?
Well, I guess that it's found that the food source is these tiny little shrimps and krill.
Krill.
And, you know, it's hard to collect those up with teeth when you're big. So you're better off just having a filter curtain.
Just sweep them on in.
Sweep them in, exactly.
Yeah.
So presumably it was this change in current that Chen mentioned, which created the circumantarctic current that created the cold waters and very nutrient-rich waters that allowed those krill to multiply. That would be my guess, but Erich is the man who probably knows more about it than I do.
This is one of my favourite subjects. It is deeply controversial.
Excellent. Take us there.
I've got skin in the game on this one. I should say teeth in the game or baleen in the game.
Have you found megalodon teeth down at Beaumaris?
I have not.
Have you found megalodon teeth in Taiwan?
Yes, and still unpublished, and we are working on that.
Ooh.
But this is so interesting. This is actually such an interesting question. We should hold it to the extinction part of the talk.
Maybe we'll go there right now because people want to know.
All right.
Kate wants to know where was the last region. Well, we can. Where was the last regions megalodons were thought to inhabit just prior to their total extinction? And another person wanted to know what's the global distribution of megalodon? Oh, go on, take us there.
So which one do you want first?
All of them.
All of them, okay, all of them at once. So first of all, where are the confirmed youngest megalodon fossils? Right now, probably California. Where have megalodon fossils been found? Anywhere, almost anywhere, where there are rocks that are originally sediments, so mud sands formed on the sea floor, anywhere between 15 million years ago and about 2.5, 3 million years ago. So anywhere where you get rock sediments like that and fossils, you are almost guaranteed to get megalodon teeth.
So 3.5 million years ago, so they would have coincided with our early ancestors, Australopithecus, yeah?
Yes.
Would they have eaten Australopithecus?
I don't think so, but I reckon that there's a fair chance Australopithecus might have seen Megalodon because Australopithecines are in southern Africa, and southern Africa has very rich waters surrounding it, and there's a lot of great white sharks there today, and I wouldn't be surprised if you're on a cliff top somewhere in South Africa, there was some of our distant ancestors looking out.
What about
maybe
fish
seeing them
and chips?
stranded on the beach.
Indeed.
Washed up on the beach after a big storm, a big hulking megalodon carcass rotting, putrid.
And then they'd pull up a tuber from the earth, chop it up into chips and eat some megalodon as the fish and have fish and chips,
Well,
Australopithecus style.
But could I just, there's a really
I know Eric was on a roll, but go back, go for it. No, Tim.
You know, the first tools that humans ever made are about 3.5 million years old. They're from Africa. They are shaped remarkably like a megalodon tooth. And I wonder whether the inspiration for those tools might have come from these things, because look at that tooth. It's a perfect tool. It's got a hand hog grip on it. It's got a very sharp edge. It's a magnificent tool. So I wonder whether, I know I'm way out in the realms of mad speculation here, but whether our Australopithecine
It's Megalodon, Tim.
Exactly. Might have been inspired by finding these teeth.
I think you're right. It's a perfect hand-sized tool, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
Eric, you were on a roll.
So where they were living, where Megalodon was living, almost anywhere you get rocks of that age. So you have Megalodon teeth popping up all over the place, even in the abyssal depths of the ocean, dredged up from the sea floor, off New Caledonia, Cuba. They're being found in Indonesia, in a few places in Australia. They're quite rare in Australia. They're relatively rare globally, but Megalodon teeth are not commonly found in Australia. When did they go extinct? Well,
let's consider why they went extinct. If they were so prevalent all over the world, what took them out? Was it a whale?
I don't think so.
So that's a very interesting question, because now we know the killer whales, they are also hypercarnivore because they are eating other marine mammals. But one of the recent study suggested this kind of hypercarnivory of killer whale, they evolved quite recently, only within about 2 million years.
So after Megalodon went missing.
Well, hold on a minute here. I think we should ask Chen about his latest discoveries.
That's an inconvenient fossil. Don't mention that.
I love this. So, Eric, You might ask him. Erich, why did Megalodon go missing?
So,
Who ate who?
well, I think it's important to think about what happens just after around about the time that we find in the fossil record the youngest in geologic age terms, the youngest known fossils of Megalodon. And they end up being around about 2.5 to 3 million years ago.
And things are getting colder.
Things are getting a lot colder. So the Arctic regions, the northern polar regions, are well and truly freezing, okay? They were refrigerating, they're now freezing. So the ice ages cometh, okay? We also have huge changes in the ocean. Sea level drops. And there's actually some evidence for, if not a mass extinction, a turnover, a changing of the guard, if you like, of many of the larger animals in the ocean's coastal environments. What we can think of as, if you like, the real megafauna. Not these diprotodons and mammoths and things, big animals in the ocean. So that happens around that time, and Megalodon kicks the geological bucket with a lot of other really big ocean giants at that time.
All right, that's your take on it. Tim Flannery,
Well,
why did and I'm just going to get you to pop the mic just under your chin, just there. 'Cause it's a bit
Sorry, I
poppy.
keep on waving it around in excitement.
Yeah.
But look, I keep on reading posts that Megalodon, in fact, is still about, especially with the Trench 2.
Oh, these are the
coming on.
cryptozoologists.
This is the cryptozoologists.
Have you heard of the
exactly.
cryptozoologists? These are
Exactly.
people that believe in creatures that there has no proof for,
Yes.
like the Loch Ness Monster
That's right.
and the Megalodon.
Exactly. But, you know...
But the Megalodon was real.
Was real.
It was real.
That's the difference.
And, you know, 50 years ago, there was some reasonable scientific speculation that Megalodon survived till a few thousand years ago. The stuff from the Challenger expedition that was dated using the growth of those manganese crystals. Clearly been disproved now, but 50 years ago it was sort of believable. And the thing about Megalodon teeth is that they are so tough, they will survive almost anything. I mean, they can erode out of an older deposit of rocks and be redeposited in a more recent deposit, which gives you this smear of possible dates. And it's very hard to try to work out when the last Megalodon actually lived.
So what's your take on why Megalodon went missing?
It's a pretty interesting question because there was another recent paper project in Science, and they suggest there was a big mass extinction of sharks back to about 20 million years ago. But Megalodon survived. But for a lot of sharks, they were extinct, and because they claim the magnitude of that fossil, the shark extinction was far greater than that extinction back to 66 million years ago.
Right. So so the 66 million years ago was, of course, the whopping big asteroid that wiped out, well, every non-avian dinosaur and about 30% of sharks, or mammals and sharks and other water species. Is that right?
66 million years ago, about 70%. So all the biggest predators, which were the great marine reptiles of the time, they were the predecessors of the great marine mammals, greater marine mammals, particularly whales, and they were marine reptiles. Things like seagoing lizards called mosasaurs.
Wow.
And plesiosaurs. The inspiration for the Loch Ness Monster.
Yeah.
Or at least some renditions of it anyway.
So what happened 20 million years ago? Why did so many sharks go?
So essentially now, we still don't really know. So people are debating, people are so some people are criticizing that science paper. But sure, the authors of that original paper, they will claim, yes, that's probably the true phenomenon. But essentially, we don't really know what was happening there.
But Tsai, sorry to take over your job,
No,
Tsai, but
no, do,
just
do,
to ask,
do.
when do you think Megalodon went extinct?
You're actually asking the question of someone from the audience as well.
Oh, well, fair enough. Well,
Yeah.
Essentially, for some of probably the fossil Megalodon from Taiwan, some of them probably will be in the Pleistocene deposit. But we are not quite sure. But the age control was not very good. So the age control is not very good. So we are still working on that.
Yes. But if it is Pleistocene, it survived through to the most recent times.
I'll acknowledge for both of you that there is maybe a precedent in that we do know that maybe even a stranger cousin, it's in the same family with the fantastic name Otodontidae, a cousin of the Megalodon called Paratodus. We do know that it has these weird hook-like teeth, and we know that there are securely dated fossils from the Pleistocene epoch. So in a way, even if Megalodon didn't make it into this, if you like, Quaternary period that we're still in, at least some close relatives did. So maybe a precedent. I'm sceptical but ready to be convinced.
Sure.
So someone's asking a question here. What is the Megalodon's closest living relative today? Are there species in our oceans today that help us tell the story of Megalodon? Are we just reliant on teeth and not enough bones?
Well, Megalodon is part of this family Otodontidae, and we have to remember given we've got teeth, vertebrae, that's about it at the moment, unless there's some amazing fossil, probably from Peru, that we don't know about. That's another story. But anyway, bear with me. So that's what we've got of these Otodontidae. They are part of a broader group called the lamniforms, and lamniforms includes a family called Lamnidae. They are alive today in the form of the white shark, basking sharks, mako sharks, porbeagle, salmon sharks. So these are maybe to some extent a good analogue or comparison for what Megalodon may have been like. You've just got to scale them up, maybe.
That's
They're
Tim Flannery.
They're an interesting group because one of the characteristics they all have is this ability to project their jaws out to some extent. So you know that bite when you see a great white coming in for the bite, it looks like its jaws are sort of poking out. It's one of the characteristics of that group. Another characteristic of the group is that they have some ability to maintain a higher body temperature, at least over parts of their body. Not all of them, but many of them. And there's a thought that the Megalodon shark had quite a high body temperature. So it was, not only is this a 60-ton predator in the ocean, it's a warm-blooded predator in the ocean. So how you produce enough food for something like that is just incredible, inconceivable to me.
Which makes its existence precarious as things get cooler.
Absolutely. And what was the population of Megalodons at any one time? You know, to me, I struggle to imagine a world that would support more than just a few thousand.
It's an ocean almost beyond the realms of imagination because it was, again, as I said, it was Megalodon was a weirdo, but the oceans at the time it was alive were strange. So it's hard to really imagine such an extraordinary biomass of marine megafauna, and yet it wasn't that long ago, just yesterday.
If I went out and jumped in the sea, what would I see off Beaumaris and Black Rock, Erich? Back then, in the days when Megalodon swam the oceans?
It was the lost Serengeti of the sea.
Oh,
I'll paint the
wonderful.
picture for you.
Do it.
There were dugongs in the shallows.
Oh.
There were sharks that don't occur in these waters, at least not until very, very recently don't occur in these waters. Tiger sharks. Maybe the odd megalodon, the rare megalodon that entered the shallow waters. There were penguins that were about the size of today's little penguin that you can see off St Kilda and at Phillip Island. Bigger penguins, biggest penguins. There was a seal that was actually a monk seal. These are these strange-looking smallish seals that today live in Hawaii and the Mediterranean. There were dolphins with really long snouts, longer than anything alive today. There were what I call the X-whales. These are baleen whales, your friends, Tsai, your favourites. X-whales that we don't really know how they fit into the family tree of baleen whales. And if you looked up in the sky, you would have seen the largest flying animal that existed since pterosaurs, the extraordinary Pelagornis, that had a wingspan as wide as an adult giraffe is tall, up to 5 to 6 metres.
Amazing. And some mighty teeth.
Big fang-like or spike-like projections.
A bird with
from its
proper
jaws.
fangs.
Yes.
Tsai, a question here. What's the likelihood that we would find more of Megalodon's skeleton in the future? Because that's the missing bit of the puzzle, isn't it?
Skeletons. So
Yeah.
the chance is pretty slim. But
Yeah.
sure, it's always a puzzle. For example, we have a whole skeleton of mammoths, of woolly mammoth.
Woolly mammoth.
Sure. But that's under very extreme conditions. So sure, the likelihood will be there, but the chance will be pretty slim.
Yeah, right. So it's been preserved by the ice, deep ice, deep in the ice, whereas in the ocean it's harder to have, well, in the rocks, I suppose, in the sediment.
Well, I'm convinced it's there, and I am certain that some young person listening to this discussion is likely to play a role in finding it.
Who's
I would
going
never
to
have...
find that in the audience? Who's going to go looking for Megalodon?
I can see
those
this.
two kids there.
Exactly.
Yes, excellent.
Look, it is out there. It's just... Tom Rich said to me when I was starting out in my career, he said, if you want to be a paleontologist, Tim, you've got to have the will to fail. So that means you just keep at it, right? Even though everyone tells you it's impossible, even though it looks like it's not going to happen, you've just got to keep at it and you will find it.
How much do we know? Alison has asked, how much do we know about Megalodon reproduction? Love that question.
I can talk a little bit about the...
They're boys, they
lemons,
don't
but
really
you
pay
do want
much
to do it,
attention
mate?
to
You can- yeah,
reproduction.
go.
Look,
Joke.
nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing. But we can speculate. So perhaps it was something, if we think about, say, litter size or how many were born.
Yeah.
Maybe something like a white shark, okay? Maybe it didn't reproduce as rapidly as smaller sharks, but all speculation.
Tsai.
So the way to do this, we will find a very close relative, for example, the great white, to consider the reproduction. But alternatively, we can also estimate the population size all along the lifespan. For example, there was another recent paper published in Science to estimate the whole Tyrannosaurus. And they estimate when Tyrannosaurus was alive during the Cretaceous, that the individual of a Tyrannosaurus would be about more than 2 billion. More than 2 billion. So
There would have been 2 billion pterosauruses.
Exactly. So then based on that kind of population size, we can also estimate how long they need to get the next offspring.
Right. So you look at the population, a total population, to try and then work your way backwards to think about how often offspring were born.
Sure, because that's a famous species, and so that's the reason it's on the cover of Science. But people don't really pay attention
journal
to our
Science, just so
species.
people know. Yeah.
So sure, if people are working on the Megalodon, it's
Just
possible.
too much T-Rex.
Yeah.
But, we can meaningfully speculate because we know that the other lamniform sharks have a practice called interuterine cannibalism. And this is where there's a number of young are fertilised and grow, the eggs grow in the uterus, and then the young eat each other till there's only, in some cases, one left.
Inside the uterus, people.
That's right. And
how cool is that?
it's amazing. So I think it's a reasonable speculation that this would have been the case with the Megalodon, because the smallest teeth of Megalodon we find are still large. So they're about that big, and they have quite a distinctive shape. So we find those teeth just in 1 or 2 areas around the world. So I think that it's quite likely that Megalodon practiced interuterine cannibalism, gave birth to very large young, between 2 and 3 metres in length, in very specific areas where those young could escape predation by other sharks. And then we found nursery areas, they're called, in places like Florida, Panama, and possibly one in the Mediterranean. But for
it's a great reproductive strategy, though, isn't it? Because you might not have too many offspring, but they're well fed inside the uterus.
Well, you've got to think, if you don't have a placenta, how do you maintain young to be large enough so that by the time they're born, they're actually viable?
Yeah.
That they're big enough to survive.
Yeah.
And if you're a shark, that's one of the very few strategies you've got.
So there's a bigger story here, and that is what's to come next. not just for us as a species, but particularly for the beautiful beings that call the ocean home. I mean, years ago you wrote The Future Eaters, which was looking at megafauna on land and the way in which humans were complicit in their disappearance and why we don't see, you know, some amazing creatures that you documented that used to call this continent home. Dr. Vicky Corrales has asked, with global warming and rising sea temperatures, what changes may we expect in the future with the current coastal environment based on the past experience, for example, of the Megalodon? This is an important story, isn't it? That we can think about what's to come for the megafauna of the sea based on this big critter's story.
Look, it is, but could I say, you know, there will be impacts from climate change on the oceans and the animals that live in it. There's no doubt about it. But what we have to realise is that what we do right now can make a difference about that. So, you know, when I was a kid swimming around Beaumaris and Ricketts Point, I never saw any of the large, you know, the banjo sharks, the Port Jackson sharks, nothing. They'd all been fished out. And a small marine reserve was put in that area, and for the first time you see some of our existing megafauna actually coming in to that marine reserve and surviving. Fishing pressure by humans is enormous. It's likely to have destroyed the flathead fishery in Port Phillip Bay. It continues to suppress all of those megafauna, the very few that survive, except in these little pocket handkerchief marine reserves. If we want to know what the oceans are really like and how incredibly full of life they can be, we need decent marine reserves. And in my view, a third of Port Phillip Bay should be put aside as a marine reserve. Then you'll catch 10 times as many fish in the 2/3 that are not a marine reserve. You know, but we need to treat the oceans with respect, and we're not doing that at the moment.
So, conservation paleobiology is something that you care very much about, using ancient stories to tell a story about the conservation needs of the species right now. Tell us more about that passion of yours.
Essentially, the idea is quite straightforward because essentially, as a paleontologist, we are looking at the extinction, but essentially we are not only looking at the extinction, we are also looking at the survival. Because at the same time, when the extinction event was happening, sure, some species went extinct, but some species still they will survive. So that's the reason when we are looking at the extinction event, we are trying to figure out whether there was some sort of selectivity. But then, just when Tim was saying, so at the moment, essentially, the key factor is all about human activity. So we just turn that off, then that will just be fine.
Just turn us all off right now. I mean, baleen whales are survivors. They were around when Megalodon were around, and they're here today.
Yeah, but for the past 100 years, millions huge baleen whales just fish out. So
one of the greatest experiments we've ever undertaken was the removal of millions of great whales from the oceans. So affecting how the oceans are structured, how they're put together, how energy is transferred, how much is transferred. We have to
talk about that more, because this is what happens when we lose an apex predator from the seas. It's not just the apex predator that potentially disappears. So much else is under threat as a result. Explain that further for us.
Yeah, so I guess the biggest animals in the ocean obviously consume a lot, but they also, in the form of whales, provide resources for animals in the deep sea. So a whale dies at the surface, its carcass might bloat and float, fills up with those gases of decomposition that Tsai experienced. What a delicious perfume that was. And then...
He's still riding high on it.
Yep.
we were tasting a little bit of meat. Oh, it's fantastic.
Okay.
Delicious.
Explodes and sinks to the sea floor. And down there you have the transfer of nutrients that were in the well-lit zones near the surface sink down to the bottom and provide a little oasis, an island in the deep, deep sea for organisms. So in life and death, the great whales are really important. And the time we're in now, where we think about the biggest animals in the ocean, the most giant of ocean giants, baleen whales, this is a strange time. We are living in the baleen scene, okay? And it is an unusual time even relative to the whole history of great whales on Earth, because it's only in relatively recent times that whales have grown to not just gigantic, but titanic sizes. So the largest blue and finback whales. So where we are right now doesn't actually have a great analogue comparison very deep in the past. So what we're doing now with the tinkering, if you like, with our oceans and the removal of baleen whales, we're entering probably a phase, if you like, that we don't necessarily have a comparison for in the fossil record. It's a fairly recent phenomenon, we think. Watch this space.
What do you imagine could happen?
Well, I think we know from the fossil record that any animals that have very, very large body sizes, largest body sizes, need a lot of energy and perhaps are specialised. They maybe don't have so much variability. They don't have a Swiss Army diet, if you like, Swiss Army knife diet or lifestyle.
So they're more vulnerable.
We know that they are generally more vulnerable, and so there are some whales, maybe even species like the blue whale, the biggest of them all, that are right at the threshold of survival. They're always sort of on a knife edge. And the same goes for, the top predators on land, like tigers, wolves, lions, etc. So these animals are vulnerable to extinction, not only at short time scales, but the fossil record shows us at longer time scales too.
Tim Flannery, your thoughts on that?
Well, look, Erich was right. What he was saying about whales, sinking to the bottom and so forth. The climate science shows that whale activity sequesters about, or before they was hunted, about a gigaton, that's 1 billion tonnes of carbon per year. So they're helping to make their own stable conditions by the way they live. And so by hunting those whales, we're exacerbating the climate problem. And I hope that as they recover, we will actually see a bit more carbon sequestered in the ocean deep.
That's right. And thinking about baleen whales and the future oceans, there are some species which have greater versatility in their diet, their feeding methods than others. So humpback whales, the grey whales of the North Pacific. But even then, we can speculate a bit on what might happen by what we see with the movement of whales. So we think a lot about, for example, the pygmy right whale today in the southern hemisphere, but fossils Tsai and I have worked on with others found in the northern hemisphere where they don't live today. The grey whale that we once thought was limited to the North Pacific and historically the North Atlantic, as the Northwest Passage is opening, as the ice melts, grey whales have started showing up in the strangest of places. They've showed up in the Mediterranean, where they haven't been for at least hundreds, maybe thousands of years. And one grey whale even swam all the way down the west coast of Africa and showed up off the coast of Namibia, where no grey whale should be.
Just one grey whale.
It seems like one, but we've got 2 or 3 that have swum, it seems, from the North Pacific, around Alaska, through the Arctic and into the Atlantic, and then all the way down into the South Atlantic, the first southern grey whale. Yep. What do you think, Tsai?
Actually, there's another very first stranding record of pygmy right whale up to the north in Gambia.
Yeah,
in
you
Africa.
two have just co-authored a paper that followed pygmy whale up to the north.
That's the fast one, but there's another, the living one.
A living one?
Yep.
Interesting. Someone's asked here, if great whites are found in cold southern New Zealand waters, why couldn't Megalodon adapt to survive in colder temperatures during the glacial periods? Tim Flannery.
Well, that's an excellent question, and I don't have an answer to it. I've wondered often myself. If it is as warm-blooded as the data suggests, then surely it should have been able to survive in the far south. But I think, Erich, we're correct in saying that we don't have fossil Megalodon teeth from southern New Zealand or southern South Africa. Is that correct?
Southern South Africa, yes.
We do have them.
They are there.
Great. Yeah.
I think the thing to think about is that it may not necessarily be the direct impacts of a cooling world 3 to 2 million years ago, but maybe the less obvious ones. And the drop in sea level, the reduction in habitat, and maybe the loss of lots of little baleen whales. So it was a time of the little baleen whales. When I say little, they're like, some of these were couch-sized baleen whales, right? Now, stunning to think about blue whales, right whales, humpback whales today. These are little whales. Well, big for mammals, bigger than us, but little for whales. Almost all of them, in fact, all of them go extinct just before or around the time that Megalodon disappears. So we might think about that and speculate on how the loss of those little whales might relate to Megalodon. And I suspect my colleague Tsai, look, Tsai, you have said that maybe Megalodon didn't feed on baleen whales. Is that what you said before?
Well, actually, I was saying the killer spoon whale.
Oh, sorry.
Yep.
Yes, okay, so scrap that. We're on the same page, I think.
Yep.
Megalodon ate those little baleen whales, so you take them away,
And they
maybe
hungry.
there was nothing else to eat.
Speaking of which, someone has asked, how might climate change impact krill? So we're heading down to a different part of the food chain now, the basis of the Southern Hemisphere food chain, and therefore krill predators. That's an important question, isn't it? Tsai?
So essentially, it's pretty interesting. So, for example, we were discussing for the past 100 years, a lot of grey whales were hunted. So then people thought, because those grey whales, they were eating quills. So when those grey whales were just out of the ocean, then the population size of quills is going to be down. But essentially, that's the other way around. Then we realized the whole the way the whole ecosystem is running is because of the poop of whales. Then the poop of whales is going to feed for other phytoplankton, which could feed those quills. So essentially, when those grey whales, when the poop of grey whales is gone, then in a way, the food of quills is also gone. So essentially, population size of quills is also declining.
Okay.
So that was pretty interesting.
Why does krill's vital, isn't it?
Well, it is for the great whales today, that's for sure. And there are concerning signs that the ice pack around the Antarctic is declining. The way I think about it as a paleontologist is that today there's about 420 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. And the last time we saw those levels was back in the mid-Pliocene when Megalodon was a living animal.
Close to the time that the Beaumaris rocks were forming.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've dug a number of fossil sites, Pliocene fossil sites in Eastern Australia, and they are very different to what we see today. Not necessarily always a drier world either. The only thing that's really changed, I guess, in terms of the geography of the continents since then was the closure of the Panama Canal. I think otherwise they're all things are pretty much as they were. So, as the climate equilibrates possibly over thousands of years, we don't know, we may be headed back to those Pliocene conditions.
I don't really want to open this can of worms in the last 2 minutes, so you've got 10 seconds to answer it. Tell us about the inconvenient fossils. Why did Erich say this to Tsai, says one of the audience members. You hate me for asking that, don't you?
Who asked that question? Who was it?
Someone you know, I suspect.
So I say that in jest. The inconvenient fossils are fantastic because they force us to really open up our minds to new possibilities.
Yeah.
So when I say inconvenient...
And cleave open the existing stories.
That's right. They can often open up whole new frontiers, vistas that we didn't imagine in the fossil record.
Yep.
But inconvenient only in the sense that one fossil can change everything. So I sometimes half joke to my former PhD student and colleague and friend James Rule, sometimes say, hey, what about that walrus fossil found in Australia? And if that ever does show up, or if it has already showed up, that's a really inconvenient fossil. Our understanding of walruses.
So I'm going to ask this, and they didn't put their name to it, but they might be either 8 or 88. I read somewhere that a fart bubble from a blue whale would be the size of a horse. What would happen if you were in a small boat directly above it?
Tsai, you've had a bit of experience with explosions from whales.
You could swim there.
You're not even going to go there, are you?
Do blue whales fart? I don't know. I understand the only animals that don't fart are sloths, according to my 10-year-old son, so I don't know. But blue whales may not fart. Has anyone ever seen a blue whale fart? Yeah.
And a final question, would anything have eaten Meg?
Only when it was dead.
Only when it was dead.
Seven-gilled sharks. We've found lots of teeth of seven-gilled sharks around these meg ancestors where the carcass. In fact, you've dug one up, Erich, I think.
That's right here in Victoria at Jan Juc on the surf coast. Yeah, the fossil of a early relative of Megalodon, an earlier species, but in the same sort of pedigree that was found with multiple teeth of six-gill sharks all around it, suggesting that its decomposing, rotting carcass was being thoroughly enjoyed as a
and they
hors
left their
d'oeuvre.
teeth behind as a little parting gesture. Paolo asks, I'm not a big fan of commercial fossil hunting and private collectors. However, do these have a place in advancing scientific knowledge? I think this is a really important question because, of course, when you find a fossil out there, do you take it home and put it in a glass cabinet, never to be seen again, or do you hand it over to an institution like the Melbourne Museum? What are your perspectives, Tsai?
Sure. The best way is always to make the donations to research institutions like the museum or the research university.
Erich?
This is a very complex issue. My quick answer is private collectors or amateur paleontologists, whatever you want to call themselves, citizen scientists, amateur naturalists, yes, they do have a vital role to play in paleontology.
There aren't enough paleontologists to cover the planet.
There will never be enough. And, you know, if there weren't non-professional fossil collectors finders, we would not have the vast majority of the important discoveries we have. So I applaud and encourage people that if they find something significant or unusual, it all depends on the local regulations too, that has to be borne in mind. But if they think they've found something, especially if it's embedded in rock, leave it, take a photo, contact your local museum and let us know about it.
Tim Flannery.
Look, I think it's really important that kids are able to go out there and explore the world. And, you know, they want to keep some of the fossils they find. But I would just say, if you think you found anything unusual, bring it into the museum to show the museum. The museum's not going to want a million echinoid fossils that kids pick up, but you might want a fossil mammal tooth from Beaumaris.
There's all kinds of interesting interests, hobbies and fetishes. It might be echinoids, I don't know.
Exactly. We're not going to talk about those people, Erich.
So a final question to you, relevant to the kids from Ren. If one wants to become a paleontologist specialising in Megalodon, where would you recommend studying or starting out? Thoughts, people? You're talking to the future paleontologists.
I'd start out looking for some, I reckon.
You're putting the kids to work, aren't you? It's cheap labour.
Yeah, exactly. And look, I know I was once one of them, you know. I would have worked. Tom's out there. Tom, you didn't need to offer me the $500, mate. I would have done it for free anyway, and polished your shoes every day just for the privilege of working in a museum and cleaning up those fossils. But it's really important, I think, you keep that enthusiasm for young people to get out there and make discoveries. There's nothing like picking something up and thinking, these eyes of mine are the first eyes that have seen this for 10 million years. It really is, it's time travel.
Human eyes.
No, it maybe could be any eyes. You're digging it out of a rock, you know, the first one you've seen.
True.
And it's just, honestly, to kind of cultivate your imagination and the thought process and stimulate that sense of scientific discovery. There's nothing like it, I think.
No, you look at a fossil and it's like looking through a telescope back through time and space.
Yeah, awesome.
Yep.
Can I just squeeze in one question to you from Curtis? Because it's relevant to kids who might go down there this summer with their snorkels, why do you think, what caused Beaumaris to be such a significant site for fossils in Australia? I mean, you're so lucky it's in your back garden.
Yeah, so Beaumaris is arguably the most significant urban fossil site in Australia and one of the most significant urban fossil sites in the world. I think the thing we have to remember about Beaumaris is there's a few different things. It's the geology, so you've got the rocks of the right type, age, and the other thing about Beaumaris is that you have something relatively rare called a bone bed in the layers of rock. So you have a concentration over thousands to hundreds of thousands of years of bones and teeth, and then they are being actively eroded.
Yeah.
And so then leaving these, travellers through time, fossil bones and teeth on the seafloor, and now you can find them.
How lucky are we? Tsai, you're about to teach at National Taiwan University the first ever paleontology class for all students across the university, yeah?
Yes. So I'll just stay curious and just to find some good colleagues you like to work with them, then you'll be happy just for the rest of your life. That's fantastic.
Please thank Tsai, Tim and Erich. What a treat. Thank you, fellas. I reckon that was pretty special. Hey, let's give them another round of applause for the radio. And thank you for being such a responsive audience. It really makes a difference when we can hear you gasp audibly and giggle, and it's really great. You had a really great energy tonight, so thanks for sharing that with us. And we would love you to fill out a survey, which I think you get via email, which you would have registered. So you'll get that via email. It really helps the museum team organise future events and understand what you loved. And even better, you go in for running for a $100 voucher at the museum shop, and who knows, you might buy a fairy toy, a Megalodon, and then you might bury it in the sand over summer, and then you might, come and do work experience with Erich. If you're 8 or 88, I don't know. Please thank the museum team and have a wonderful night, and if you're at the CAVEPS conference, I hope it goes extraordinarily well this year. Thank you so much. And I've got one more thing to say. Please do me a favour and follow Big Ideas on the ABC Listen app. Thank you very much. Bye. Well done. That was